shame, it's the name of her game. There's so much to do, and we're gonna speak true. So many to blame.
Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Shame on You podcasts. We are delighted to have some fascinating guests today with all kinds of credentials. And I want to point out to you that we're doing things just a little bit differently today. We're kind of expanding off of the things that we usually talk about in terms of raising awareness and resources and support on the issue of childhood sexual abuse. We're kind of going to take that conversation out to a more global level and talk more about how it's not just the organizations that are fighting our particular mission, but all nonprofit organizations in general and what they face in terms of obstacles and scrutiny and oversight and everything there is out there that keeps them from solving their problems and accomplishing their missions and doing the great good work that they desperately want to do. We've spent a lot of time talking about how shameful it is that in the nonprofit sector that there is so few resources, so little time, so little money devoted to advancing what we consider to be our mission, which is preventing sexual abuse, if that's even possible, but at least raising awareness about childhood sexual abuse and campaigning for more resources to be thrown at the problem. What we're doing today is we're kind of widening the scope of that a little bit, and we're going to talk more about how it's not just the agencies and organizations whose mission it is to combat childhood sexual abuse, but how they share restrictions and problems that really are faced by the entire nonprofit sector. And the inspiration for today's podcast is right here, this book, Uncharitable, by Dan Pallotta, somebody who I have been vaguely familiar with for a while because I'm familiar with him through his TED Talks, but I did not know he had written a book. I've had a number of conversations, however, with his book, about his book with my friend here, Laura, but only got around to reading it like about a month or two ago, and I immediately knew we had to start talking about some of these things in a podcast as soon as possible. So you'll understand more as we go on, but let me introduce to you our guests today. Right here we have Laura Kinter. We have mentioned her many times before because we always thank her for hosting us in this wonderful gallery space. And as executive director of Awakenings, she is also the head of the organization who is helping us by being our fiscal sponsor for the Shame on You podcasts. And finally, we have her here today in living color. Laura is, as I said, the executive director of Awakenings. She started with the organization around 2012, 2013? 14. I wish I could say I'd had the luck and brains to hire her, but I did not. She was hired by a woman who was working for me at the time, but I had the good sense and brains to make sure that I kept her. So Laura, I founded Awakenings. Laura took over for me around 2016, and the organization is growing faster and better under her than I ever could have done. I am grateful to Laura, and I always will be. Her impressive educational background includes studies at a film school in Prague, which I only just found out about.
And they speak Czech.
Yes, oh, and she speaks Czech.
I don't.
She did her underwear. Oh, that's a good one, Jean. She did her undergrad at Vassar where are they? Connecticut, Yale?
Poughkeepsie, New York.
Poughkeepsie, New York. See how much I know about Eastern schools. So she understudied Vassar, and she is currently earning her MBA from the University of Chicago Business School under a full scholarship there, and you're going to finish that in June?
Yes.
And she has also had the honor recently to be named an Obama Scholar. I couldn't be prouder of her if I'd birthed her myself. So that's Laura. Then we have a different guest today. Tom Andreessen is not able to join us. And to have the discussion that we want to have today about the difficulties it is to raise awareness and funds in the nonprofit sector, I wanted to be sure that we contrasted the things that we talked about with a viewpoint from the for-profit sector. So on my right here, I have Ernie Webb, who has also a long list of impressive credentials. Northwestern undergrad, graduated with honors from Harvard Business School, worked with International Harvester and with Illinois Tool Works, bought a small business in 2001, which was saved it from bankruptcy, turned it around, and ran it until his retirement in 2016. I should also mention that I am married to Ernie and have been for 46 years, mostly happily. So Ernie knows business, and they do the case study method at Harvard Business School, and I honestly feel he brings an approach to business that I do not normally hear from people. It's kind of like a pure understanding of the principles, and he articulates them very well. So he is going to be a wonderful person to provide us with like the for-profit sector as we discuss business-like and non-business-like activities of nonprofits. Anything I've left out? Gee, I hope not, because I'm tired of talking. I'm gonna throw it over to Derek, who's going to tell us a little bit briefly about what's been going on in terms of our social media and website, and then we're going to jump right in.
Yeah, but before we jump in, I just want to let everybody know that our Patreon link is available, patreon.com/Shame on You Podcast Social. We have that page is up and running. Please support us if you can. These conversations are very important, and the conversation that we're going to get into today is a conversation that I don't think is happening very many, if any, places, and it's very important. So if you can support our work, we'd definitely appreciate it. And all our social media channels are live. Those will be full of content in the coming weeks. This episode will be available on Spotify, all the platforms, and it'll also be available on our website. So anyways, one of the places I thought maybe we could start and jump off this conversation today was regarding here's a plug, Dan Pilata, if you're watching this, please send us a shout out.
Please know that we appreciate you.
I thought this would be this covers all bases, especially in just American society right now. And at the beginning of the book, you said that at the basis of this is the idea of doing good works for free. And it comes from the Puritan fundamentalist ideology. Just we're all born of natural sin, so therefore we have to live our lives and repent forever. But it was interesting that I thought about it because especially today in America, everything's so divided. You're either all the way over here on this side, you're all the way to the left, all the way to the right. And it seems like, radical conservatives, Democrats, feminists, Christians, everybody across every sector has the idea you should do good works for free. And I just thought that was really interesting, and kind of how it's really an ideological problem that we're trying to address here.
I would just like to throw in that most of the people at this table have heard me complain many, many times, and I've probably touched on it in earlier episodes of the podcast, how hard it is to be a donor in the nonprofit sector, to find the right organizations, to try to understand how they work, to try to find ways, limited by the size of everybody's abilities to make grant, how to find ways to make them be more effective. And I come from the for-profit background, and to me it was always about fundraising, increasing revenues, and I had some really silly expectations about what a relationship with an organization and a donor would be like. So, like I said, I was already sold long before I read the book, but he was able to kind of give me a framework and articulate things that have been driving me crazy for years, helping me understand where some of these attitudes came from, and actually giving us a historical perspective. Derek just said it. It comes from the Puritans. When was the last time we paid attention to the Puritans? Come on. Are they supposed to be driving the nonprofit sector? Laura, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to start with, because I think it is the foundation of this separation between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. And the problem is, and he explores this in the book, the for-profit sector has had hundreds of years to evolve, and the nonprofit sector has been stuck, frozen in time with those Puritan morals, that it is supposed to be a sacred place where we are atoning for our sins of profit. And so while the for-profit sector has evolved and developed all of these very powerful tools, like research and development, like the investing, in the stock market, and
growing your assets through investment.
Yes, taking risk, paying for talent, investing in talent. The nonprofit sector has been punished for trying those things, and the one metric we use to decide whether a nonprofit is efficient or not is based on the amount of overhead you have, which includes all of those things I just listed. So it's really backwards, and I think he does a really good job at sort of taking us through a bunch of different reasons why and some maybe controversial potential solutions for it. But I'm a big fan of this book, and I'm so happy you read it, and thank you for having me on this podcast.
Well, thank you for making me finally get it.
Yeah, this is all because of you.
And as I have, I've said many times, it is sometimes my curse that I have been on both sides. I have been a donor and have been looking for organizations to make grants to. I have run a nonprofit, i.e. Awakenings, and I have looked for people to fund us. So I see both sides of the question, but the one thing that I think bridges that huge gap is that everybody says the same things about programs versus administration. It used to drive me crazy. I would go to some nonprofits and they'd always say, well, she's program, she's admin. She's program, she's admin. I think it was probably about 2 years before I even understood what admin was short for. And I hear it from the people who are working at nonprofits, and I hear it from other donors. And they say, I want to make sure all my money goes to programs and not to administration, or they might say overhead. And, bless my heart, from day one, I always thought that's insane. If you don't have personnel at administration, who's running the programs? If you don't have a place you can all go and make sure that the light bill's paid, how on earth are you even able to function? I'm talking to intelligent people here, people who've made money, people who I think understand these basic concepts, and they'll still say, I want my donated dollars to go to programs. I'm looking for a spot here to get a for-profit perspective on this. So I'm looking at you.
Well, yeah, and I will say in regular business, for-profit business, the kind of the split is between staff and line. If you're in the line, then you're selling to a customer or you're making the product. And those people think they're pretty cool. And if you're staff, then you're overhead, you're the accountants, you're the HR people, you're the slugs who just come along with us. So there are splits like that in for-profit world. I will say, when I read this book about the Puritans, I didn't really buy the Puritan part. And I would say that if you read this book and you can't buy into that, there's still tons of good stuff in it. I mean, we don't have to go to the Puritans. We go 1,000, 1,500 years earlier. And time after time, when the rich feudal lords would die, they'd leave their money to the church to atone for their sins.
Right.
And now
Did it work?
They weren't really into profit, but they knew they had sins. So the idea that charity was going to get leftovers. The robber barons with the oil and the railroads. Oh, I've spent all my money cheating everybody. Well, now I'm going to give it back. So I'm going to have libraries named after me, and I'm going to found the University of Chicago. And so the idea of atoning for your sins is way older than the Puritans, and I think is part of us all. But charity doesn't have to be that. Charity is a delivery of a product, a goodness, a filling of a need. And that's all that business is the tools to fill needs.
I remember when I read this, I had the chart on here somewhere, but it was like MIT business graduate, Harvard business graduate, all the great business schools, like after 10 years, they could be expecting to make, I don't remember the exact numbers, somewhere around, over $250,000 a year. But like, then did it compare and contrast to,
And this is an old book.
right, yeah, this is
And
from.
we never did.
What is this from, 2008? No, old. Old is like, in today's society, old is last month. But then it compared and contrasted to just like executive directors of nonprofits, and it's like, if you make $90,000 a year, you're doing real good. And it's like, the one thing that as I've gotten more into the nonprofit space, I see a lot of problems. But the one thing is like, me starting my own company is like, you want to be able to pay the best people to do the best possible job. And like, that seems like one of the huge problems is if you are a somewhat rational person that wants to do good, but you also have to provide for your family and your loved ones, it's like, and you're a talented individual, why would you want to ever get a job in any nonprofit? It just, unless like your passion for whatever cause it is outweighs your need to provide for your family. But still, it's like, why would you, the best people in the world that are the best at the jobs, why would you want to venture into the nonprofit sector? It's just like they're really, just hamstringing themselves, it seems like.
Yeah. I had actually a student in a class last year, a business school student from another country, who, upon learning about sort of the pay discrepancy in nonprofits, actually asked the question to the entire class. She said, well, so does that mean that most people who work in nonprofits are incredibly rich because they're the only ones that can afford to take such low salaries? And my head almost fell off my shoulders. That is a logical thing to ask, but it's absolutely not true. And that 90,000 marker being considered a pretty good salary, that's without stock options. That's without maybe, a 401k. Like, I've never had a retirement plan in my life. Mm-hmm. These are huge financial sacrifices, especially for young, business leaders to make, that really have a lasting impact on your earning potential for your entire life. Mm-hmm. And, again, and Dan Pallotta kind of lines out why we sort of penalize nonprofits for wanting to invest in their leaders. For-profit companies, especially the big ones, constantly send their employees to business school, pay for the whole thing. That is investing in leadership, and then they get to reap the benefits of that person's new knowledge and skills and network. And that just doesn't exist for us.
No. I want to talk a little bit too, and again, I think you're the person to do that. I want to talk a little bit about official kind of restraints and constraints and oversight of nonprofits. For example, in Illinois, most of the agencies that I have worked with are ICASA organizations, and we've talked about that in earlier podcasts. There are a lot of constraints if you are an ICASA organization. Awakenings is not, but I know from personal experience and conversations with present and former executive directors, some of whom have become close friends, the amount of oversight is incredible. And the punishments that can be dealt out if you fall short of those standards, it can go beyond any kind of official scrutiny. I mean, people are people, and sometimes these things get personal. Now, Awakenings is not an ICASA agency, but I'm sure, I'd like you to speak for a few minutes about the difference between operating as an agency like that is receiving federal money from pass-through, what they call pass-through kinds of grants, and something like Awakenings where you are, pursuing money outside of that.
Sure. So, ICASA is definitely specific to our mission area, but I think the idea of pursuing a large government contract is a common goal among many nonprofits across mission areas. And the reason why is because if you think about, a nonprofit that starts out, it's just like a for-profit business, you have a proof of concept phase. That is what philanthropy is very good for. That's what a lot of foundations love to fund. Here's some money to test out these programs, prove that they're making an impact, and then you move on from there. And to be honest, a lot of nonprofits get stuck in that phase. I don't know what the statistic is, but the majority of them get stuck in the under $500,000 operating budget level and can never break out of that.
Or they never have the tools they need to do proof.
Exactly.
Because right there, proof is going to mean numbers and statistics, and if you can't pay anybody on staff who's got any kind of accounting background or just plain good with numbers, you're going to fail proof of concept every time, right?
Right. So then, if you do manage to break through and prove your concept and you start to scale your programs, the end-all be-all for a lot of nonprofits is considered a big government contract, which means that the government has recognized the efficacy of your program, it is solving a problem or filling a gap that the market has left and that the government also cannot solve itself. And it's sort of like the ultimate validating, like, all right, you did it, here we go, we're adopting this by paying you, contracting you as a vendor to produce these services on a larger scale. And that, is maybe considered the best M&A, you could hope for. However, like Jean said, these large government contracts come with a ton of reporting requirements, a ton of scrutiny, and I mean, there have been many points where I've wished we could get, we could become an ICASA agency, because I personally think that the government should see arts as healing, as a valid and impactful service for survivors. But at the same time, I don't know if operationally we could even handle, the restrictions that come with that. Because I know for a fact that the ICASA agency doesn't really grant enough money to these agencies to fulfill everything that they're demanding. And so for us, what that means is pursuing other means of revenue. And I think that's another really important distinction when it comes to successful nonprofits. You can rely a lot on grants, you can rely a lot on individual donors, but if you do not have a revenue source, an earned revenue source that creates a cushion just in case the government budget gets cut, like what's happening to the ICASA agencies right now, or there's a huge dip in individual giving, which is also happening right now. If you have no cushion for that, no way of earning revenue like any other business does, you have very, very little hope of succeeding in the long term. And that is the exact kind of thing that, this book talks about, something that nonprofits are often punished for. But if you look at the successful big ones like universities, like I go to the University of Chicago. During the day, my campus is used for classes. At night, they have a huge revenue stream from conferences that they host, also tuition, So does that answer your question? I don't want to keep going.
No, it's good background. It's good. What I was thinking, I was sitting here thinking about there must be kind of a parallel in for-profit world. We talk about startups. We talk about, the stages of capital development, venture capitalists, different models. I think we've all seen Shark Tank. So I was wondering, Ernie, if you could give us some compare and contrast there. She was talking about, proof of concept to a certain level, and then another level, and the constraints that come in there, and the final goal being the big government contract. If you could kind of start with that and take us through something parallel that happens in the for-profit world.
Well, I think Laura actually said the magic word, scale, which is just a kind of a fancy word for size. Every business knows that the road to success is to get bigger. While most people in America actually are employed by small businesses, that's not where the fun is. That's not where the glory is. The glory is the General Motors, the Facebooks, the big ones. And when you get to be a big company, you can hire specialists to get into nits and nats that you couldn't do before. You can acquire the best talent. You can have purpose-built resources. You can have the latest technology. You can compete. And that's really what we want from our nonprofits. But we deny them that. We say, smaller is better. Well, is it though? I mean, let's take the million nonprofits that we have. Let's cut out by 1,000. So now we only have 1,000 left, but each of those has 1,000 times the resources that the previous average did. Now, what could they do with that money? Gee, they could hire the best people and have the best stuff. Nonprofit, in for-profit world, I'm trying to sell my brand of bran flakes instead of yours, which is really trivial. In nonprofit world, you are fighting the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the biggest, worst, most devastating evils that the world has ever faced and has always faced. War, pestilence, hunger. So
Childhood sexual abuse.
That's there too. That's probably under violence. We'll put that with war. But the point is that we're fighting the biggest terrors that have ever existed. And what are we sending? Well, we're sending the dedicated, brave, loyal people to do it. We're sending our Polish Lancers to battle the Nazi tanks in '39. We're sending people to gunfights with knives. We need to send the biggest, most powerful things we can think of. We need to send the Marines. We need SEAL Team 6. We need the 27 Yankees. We should put everything we know how to do against these problems. Because you know what? If you don't have a chance.
By the way, double major, history and economics.
That wasn't obvious.
Was it obvious? I'd like to talk a little bit more about oversight, because obviously there's oversight in the for-profit sector. Who's to say whether it's more or less? One of the things that Dan talks so eloquently in the book about is we are going to put the same restraints on people who say their end result is eliminating world hunger, and we're going to make their job harder than we make the people who manufacture hula hoops and possibly dangerous pharmaceuticals. Could you talk a little bit to us about what's, levels of restraint in for-profit world and kind of contrast them to what Laura's been talking about? I mean, obviously there's governmental oversight.
Yes.
And obviously people spend a lot of time complaining about it.
In business, the bigger you are, the more you're regulated. And most credit card companies, for instance, have whole departments for compliance, just to make sure I'm doing right by the law. But in general, the cool thing about business is that if you're not breaking the law and you're not breaking moral codes, you can do whatever you want. It's all about, do I have more money now than I did a year ago? If I did, well, I must be doing all right. I mean, now, so you're, what was the question?
Lost your train of thought. I was asking for your
regulation.
opinion on how compare and contrast
Yes.
regulation in the for-profit sector.
Let me put it this way. If you see a headline in the paper, a businessman cheats a contractor, well, you think, well, okay, buyer beware, the contractor's big and powerful too. And then you see foundation cheats the poor. Well, that's different. People get morally outraged. So I think government thinks they have more purchase to regulate nonprofits because they're protecting the poor. Whether that's their real motivation or not is a different question. But I think there's more psychic pain associated with a cheating nonprofit than with a cheating for business, because you think businessmen cheat all the time anyway.
But that argument kind of like implies that the nonprofits are much more likely to be doing eviler things.
Right.
And that's nuts.
And that you just this is one of the notes I took, because we're talking about at least the morality of things, and the oversight is there to enforce some level of morality on both sides. But he wrote, you can sell expensive sneakers to poor kids in the ghetto. You can oversee a fast food chain that irritates beef. You could manage a global conglomerate that makes violent movies for children. You can get paid millions of dollars to act in those movies. Advertising company that encourages children to eat and drink more sugar. Supervising the marketing of cigarettes to the rural poor. And these are all places you're allowed to make profit. You're not allowed to make profit doing anything good helping the world. It's like
there were times as I was reading the book, I just had to stop and look around me and remind myself I am living in a real world. Somebody is actually saying these things. I have spent 69 years in this real world and have never really thought about it in quite that way. Laura, you introduced me to the book. I'd kind of be interested in hearing your reaction when you first started reading those words.
Yeah, it was difficult to read, to be honest. I mean, you made my background seem so shiny and wonderful, but I will say that I came into this career completely untrained and had the benefit of a very generous benefactor to give me a job and allow me to try a lot of new things and just learn by doing. And it wasn't until I started business school in 2021 where my eyes really were starting to open. Now I have the framework and the language for some of these things that have always frustrated and confused me. I remember back, one of my earliest, I remember just getting in an absolute fugue because someone made a similar comment to me like, that's admin, or we don't fund those costs. And it was about an audit. And I thought, well, if we don't get an audit, we don't keep our status, and the business would close. That's a necessary part of this business. And the funny thing, and this is another thing that plagues nonprofits that I will say, J.B. Pritzker just passed a new bill that changes this a little bit, but as soon as you hit the $300,000 threshold of an operating budget, you are then required to go through an audit process for the state, which costs $10,000 at least.
So what could change?
Well, now the threshold is $500,000. So
Helps a little.
It helps a little. It does. And I just remember thinking, man, can we win here? Like, can we win in any of this? So when I read the book, I thought, this guy knows what I'm talking about. He really just put these feelings into words that had been bubbling up to the surface for such a long time. And to be honest, since I came into the nonprofit sector, it was really my first job out of college. It was all I knew. I didn't have, a ton of friends in the corporate sector. My parents weren't really in that field. It was completely foreign to me. So I was really sort of raised in this way. Mm-hmm. And to look around for the first time and see all of the tools and all the benefits and all of the free passes that the for-profit sector has and gets to use, it was painful. It was really painful. And I think this book is a really good manifesto for that, but I will say it was hard to read. I had to put it down every couple pages and just, go for a walk and fume about it.
Okay, so it was more likely to make you cry than to make you doubt your sanity?
Oh, no, I didn't doubt. Honestly, it felt validating. It felt validating.
But, okay, made you doubt the sanity of the world.
No.
That's all I could think of. It's just like the world is even more insane than I had thought. Mm-hmm. Derek, you have a foot in both nonprofit and profit world. Mm-hmm. You balance them in a way that I have never really seen as I've come to know you. So can you give me like some personal, like Laura's been doing here? You were new to the concepts a little bit in this book. Mm-hmm. So, tell me too, your first reactions as you read this. Rage, stupefying bewilderment.
My first reaction to reading it was like, how did I never see this before? Because hanging out with you guys, I've learned a lot more about and then interacting with other nonprofits, trying to get people involved with the podcast, just talking to people that make decisions, talking to people that make decisions at nonprofits, executive directors, and it's almost like they move in, like I'll send an email and I'm like, in my world, I'm like, you saw me before we did the podcast. I've got 40 phone calls. I'm sending 18 text messages a minute and I'm like checking in on all these different things. And if I have a client that needs an answer or a problem solved, I'm going to solve it right now because that's a client and that's cash flow. We need that, especially because we're new. In that world, it's like, I'll get back to you in a couple months. And it's like, I don't understand how they function. Like, one of the things I won't say who or what, I won't name names, but somebody that I know is interested in donating to a nonprofit, right? And we're talking to them, and I see that as like, okay, from where I'm seeing it, I'm like, that is a potential client. A potential donor is similar to a potential client for your nonprofit. And I'm like, I would show up to your kid's Little League baseball game to make sure that we can close or get the donation so then we can, have wherever the money needs to go, it's going to go. And in the nonprofit world, it's almost like, well, I'll get back to you. And I'm like, I don't understand where that thinking came from. But it was also this whole moral side of things that really opened up my mind of like, where did this idea come from that we're not allowed to profit off doing good things? And it's like that really, I mean, like the regulation side of it and having to deal with the IRS and having to get audited, I don't know about that. It sounds like worse than going to the dentist every day. Like it just sounds, I'm just like, oh my, people say the word IRS, I'm like, oh my God. I pay my taxes.
We all do. Well, and that gets back to something that I touched on very briefly, which was that I guess you could say I entered the nonprofit sector in 1998. That's about almost exactly 25 years ago. And I did come into there with a bunch of expectations which were turned upside down. I come from a similar, my business background is similar to Derek's. I came from what I call the creative services, film, AV, tools that were, not marketing per se, but tools to drive marketing. And sometimes I tell people we didn't treat our clients like royalty. We treated our clients like gods. So I came from there, and no, I didn't want to be treated like a god. But I would make donations, not as large as I am fortunately able to do now. But then it would be like, I really need to talk to you about something. And then it was like, I'll send you a link. And of course, at that time, I was kind of a digital idiot, and it would be like, what I really want is to spend 3 minutes with you on the phone, and you're sending me a link. And this was assuming that my phone calls got returned. You know, it took me forever to just understand the organizations I was dealing with. One of the primary services they offer was counseling services. Counselors don't work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I mean, nobody does anymore, but I'm talking about 1998, so people work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Nobody bothered to ever tell me, you know, Jean, we're not staffed 24/7. You know, we don't have a receptionist at the door all the time. We don't always have somebody covering the phones. If you call at 3 o'clock on a Friday, there will be nobody here. It took me, it makes me sound like an idiot, but it took me a long time to figure out stuff like that. So this gap that exists where nobody even seems to understand, there are certain things we just really need to make sure our donors understand, and they don't do it. I mean, you know, everybody's guilty of that. You know, it's why you hire writers, and thank you for my first 25 years of work. But, you know, everybody gets used to thinking the way we do things, what I'm familiar with, that's the way everybody does it. You know, and I don't know what it takes sometimes to shake people up and say, there's just something really simple you could do here. We're talking about 10 seconds to send a text. Or we're talking about, you know, by the way, you know, our help desk is staffed Monday through Thursday, and that's it. Just things like that. They don't happen.
Now that you just said that, oh, sorry to cut you off. When you just said that, my light bulb went off. It's like, because the reason they don't is because they're not incentivized to. They're not incentivized to do it. I'm incentivized to go way above and beyond because that means I'm going to make more money, right? They're not. They're capped essentially. So they're going to be like, yeah, I'll get to you when I can get to you, and that's all I can offer.
I was going to say, I think, you know, not being replied to fast enough, you know, if you're a donor, I think that is most likely more reflective of a capacity problem at the nonprofit than it is them not caring or being bad at their job. You know, like at Awakenings, we have 3 full-time staff members, about to have a part-time person. We have a handful of teaching artists. We have a couple contractors. We have a significant board and volunteer committees. Every single one of those people is involved in our programming. I do not have a single administrative employee besides myself. So when someone calls here and the phones aren't answered, that's because all of our people are running all over the city installing artwork and running our programs. There is no receptionist. There is no administrative person, you know, and no one is going to fund a receptionist for us.
No, but people coming into the nonprofit sector and wanting to hopefully make at least a small difference, we don't understand that. Nobody bothers to explain it. I agree with you. It's about capacity. You know, I have these conversations all the time. I'll say, you know, who's your fundraiser, and are they full time? And they'll say, like, well, no, but if we had more money, we'd love to have one. You know, so it's a combination of both. It's, you know, it's capacity issues, and it's, like I said, we're all guilty of staying in our little boxes and failing to think that there are people out there who just don't understand certain things. None of us, as an example, none of us really kind of understood all this until we read this book. That's what we're all saying here today. Not sure where to go next. You haven't talked for a while.
There was something I thought about that a conversation Ernie and Laura were having before we got on, and they were talking about the stock market, and then what else was on there? Like the restaurant idea, like putting a bunch of money into real estate and into income properties. It's like just different revenue streams for nonprofits that are like being able to benefit from the for-profit world and what that would look like. And like if you could wave a magic wand and then like you can continue running Awakenings without any of the restrictions from a 501c3, like what would you start doing?
Well, it's tough because, you know, so what Derek is referencing in the book is that he has these 2 examples, you know, of things that are not allowed in the nonprofit sector. Something like buying a restaurant and having a revenue stream that can just pay for all of the programs they need to administer. Or, you know, and that's the other one being investors. You know, the money that goes into a nonprofit cannot come back out. So we, you know, there's these people called venture philanthropists, which like to think that they're investors, but they're just big donors that maybe have more innovative ideas of what their money can do. But no one can put money into a nonprofit and expect to make a return on it. And I think that is probably his most controversial take is, what if we eliminated that statute? What if we allowed this big infusion of capital into the nonprofit sector through investments where the people putting the money in can make the return, on a potentially successful project? And he says, will a lot of them be unsuccessful? Yeah, sure. But guess how many are unsuccessful in the venture capitalism world?
Yeah.
Almost all of them. They count on that.
Yeah, and I can speak from my own personal experience from the early days at Awakenings. The thing that I was told over and over again was, okay, yes, nonprofits are allowed to make money, but not in a non-mission related area. So, because one of the first things that I tried to do was kind of set up a little gift shop. We have artists, they're creating things. Wouldn't it be nice if they could sell them? Museums have gift shops. It's obviously not illegal. And people told me over and over again, well, that might pass scrutiny as long as it's, mission related.
It would be mission related.
Well, that would be, but if you want to make money, you can't close yourself down like
Right.
that. I mean, you got to do what makes economic sense.
Right. I think the other distinction here is because, to be honest, I don't know what we would do if all the restrictions were lifted, because there is such thing as a hybrid organization. There is such thing as a benefiting corporation. These new legal statuses for businesses that can allow both profit and social impact to be prioritized, and one at the sacrifice of the other. I don't think they work particularly well. So I don't really know what the golden solution is.
Why don't you think those types of organizations work?
That's a good question. I think I've heard a lot of horror stories from people who have worked at them that they maybe get the worst of both worlds.
Right.
What also might work is the way the Cubs were supposed to be set up, that there was a president of baseball operations, and his job was to make all the money he can, put it in a wheelbarrow, and take it over to the player guy, who would then use it to hire players. So, I could certainly see where a not-for-profit could have in the back room all these guys who made them money. And then the programming people would spend it wisely for the mission. So in that way, it might work. I think one of the things that stops us from having the stock market or really the growth of nonprofits is because we can't measure very well. You go to any business and you're going to get market share by zip code, by age demographic. I'm going to know exactly how well I'm doing with who and what are the possible levers I can maneuver to get better with the people I want to get better with. And in not-for-profit world, you can sometimes measure your output. How many meals am I serving? How many counseling sessions have I held? But am I really making any progress against this great, huge, all-powerful evil? I don't know. And so how are you ever going to have a stock market or a return on an investment when you can't measure how someone is doing? There is no money to help you keep track of. In not-for-profit world, it's all about utility. What good am I doing? What benefits am I providing? And it's not monetized, so it makes scorekeeping very hard.
I do think there is maybe a bottomless pit of ways to measure nonprofit impact, but maybe that's the topic for another podcast. But one thing,
Bottomless pit. All right.
But to circle back, Derek, to your question, since I absolutely did not answer it, what would I do if all the restrictions were lifted? What's so interesting to me about that question is that my goals for Awakenings would not change at all. Mm-hmm. The tax status and the legal structure of a business should not determine the goals. It should just determine am I tax exempt or am I not? Both are businesses. I would just make different choices I would hire a ton more people. I mean, like I said before, we don't have any administrative employees. I would invest in marketing. I've also thought about setting up some sort of commissioned gift shop where survivors can make artwork and sell it, and we can get a portion of the proceeds to help run our programs.
Absolutely.
You know, the marketing campaigns and I know that's sort of where you exist in, you know, put a megaphone to this issue. I would love to be able to participate in something like that. And the reason I can't is because I have not figured out ways to make money for those parts of the business yet. So the goals of Awakenings, if we were a for-profit business, would absolutely stay the same, but the pathway would be completely clear and open to me. You know, I'm a very good salesperson. I know if I got in front of some VCs, because I have done this,
and then
you know, I would persuade them, but that's not an option that's available to me.
You'd be able to put together a package, a capital campaign, go out there, raise money, and then promise them, you know, you get a return. You can't do that's like the part you're like, but that's like, you just can't do that. It's very bizarre.
You know, they're just, one of the things that frustrates me is that just, it seems like every time I turn around, I see like it's a closed loop. You know, we can't do this because we don't have that. Why don't you have that? Well, it's because we can't do this. You know, speaking as a donor who is about as passionate as it gets without, you know, running around chopping off heads and setting fires, you know, I am continually frustrated because I feel that in order to make a real impact, a donation has to be a certain size. You know, I wish I were in the position where my donations could cover a staff position. You know, I would just dearly, dearly love to be able to get to that point. Because I know when I have conversations with people and I say, how many people do you have on staff that devote themselves to fundraising? Now, are you talking about grant writing? Are you talking about individual donations? Are you talking about corporations and sponsorships? And the answer is always, you know, grant writing. And, you know, why don't you have more people on staff? Because we don't have the money. Why don't you have the money? Well, because we didn't raise it this year and this funding got cut and that funding got cut. It's kind of like I hear on both sides of the equation, on the nonprofit, you know, the people who need the money, and the donation side, the people that hopefully could donate the money. It's like everybody thinks in these endless loops. And I don't know how to get past that. You know, when I say, why don't you do more individual fundraisings? Because I don't have the staff.
Yeah, I think part of it, you know, at least from my perspective as someone who's running a very scrappy, small budget organization, the idea of hiring an individual giving associate, someone who is dedicated to cultivating a donor base, following up and gathering these individual donations would be a terrible idea. For me, I can spend a couple days writing a grant and then I can get $65,000.
Yeah.
The amount of time it would take to cultivate a donor base would be years and years and years.
Yeah,
and
we've had these conversations.
yeah, of course. But
yeah.
but again, you know, and this goes back to another thing that nonprofits are sort of barred from. It would be a good decision in the long term. Investing in that person in the long term over a 10-year horizon, it would absolutely pay off. The ROI would be incredible because that person, that position, whether it's not the same person, would be cultivating donors that last over years and slowly increase their donations, and they would tell their friends and their friends. But in 1 year, which is usually the time span that nonprofits are kind of operating in, you know, the amount of money that person is going to bring in is not even going to cover half of their salary. So that would be a loss, and it's all overhead, all admin.
Right.
You know.
Are there grants though that specifically allow you to say you can use this to increase staff?
Yes, there are salary support grants. We've gotten several of them. Most of them have been programmatic specific.
There we go again.
I think Laura makes an excellent point where she's saying, look, I've done the math, and the math says it's not worth it. But I think that to answer your question, Gene, or to address it another way, is it's a failure of marketing on the nonprofit's point of view. Why don't, you know, when a university wants to build a building and they come at you for the building, they know you're not actually buying a specific brick for the building. So why don't they come to you and say, be part of our campaign to hire a fill in the blank? You know, it's kind of goofy to not do that. It's like if you're running a for-profit and there's a sales downturn and a recession, well, I got to lay off my salespeople. No, That's exactly the wrong thing
Oh,
to
I
do.
know.
Keep all your salespeople because now's the time that you need them more than ever. So when is it never the right thing to raise the money? You know, we talked about a hybrid organization. All the big foundations are from for-profit organizations. The Rockefellers, the Ford Foundation, the Polk Brothers Foundation here. The biggest one that has the Genius Grants. MacArthur Foundation. All these things are for money. So there's nothing wrong with having a big pile of money to support the good things that happen.
The other thing I did want to contribute to this, which he does touch on in the book as well, is the fact that it is way more expensive to raise money for unpopular causes. Unpopular if you're only listening.
Absolutely.
Here we
In
are.
big quotes,
Absolutely.
which is, when I have plenty of colleagues in the nonprofit sector, a ton of which work in the education, early childhood education, and I look at them and I'm like, can I curse?
Yeah, 100%,
I
yeah.
fucking wish I was asking people
You
for
sure
money
fucking can.
for early childhood education, for climate change, for homelessness, for you name it, any of these issues that are much more accepted and talked about and prioritized by the change makers of the world. Something like childhood sexual abuse, it takes, I wish that would be a good statistic for us to figure out how much more money it costs to raise per dollar for an issue that is so stigmatized,
How much more fucking money does it take to?
Well, and Derek and I have actually had some discussions about this. How do you raise money for the prevention of cruelty to animals? No one wants to think about that, but it can be done. And I think if capitalism and for-profit show you anything, it's that anything can be done.
Yes. Yes.
Gosh, is that a good place to take a break?
I think we're closing in on almost an hour. There's one thought I wanted to leave us with because this book, I looked it up. The book was written in 2008. So this is kind of like an idea I've been workshopping. I want you guys to ping pong back a solution at me if you got one. Dum dum dum. Okay, so he talked a little bit about how nonprofits don't have the tools that for-profit does. And one of the things that he couldn't technically address because it wasn't happening right now, but in the free market, we're living in the digital world now, they are like streamlining the consumer process, so they're eating up the market. So all businesses, Amazon, everybody, the amount of money available is just being eaten up because they're in your face, they're on these 24/7. Every big company's in front of their consumer, right? Nonprofits are. So I'm like, there'll be the legacy nonprofit institutions that have $1 billion, those will always be around. But the smaller ones, like, is the doomsday clock, started for them? Or what can they do to combat that? Because it seems like the amount of available money is just going to be continually eaten up by big business.
I would say yes. The resident pessimist. I've said for years, there's too many nonprofits. There's too many small nonprofits. It's harder to be a small nonprofit than it is to be a larger one. Hello, isn't the answer, combining forces. So, nothing new. You've all heard me say things like that before, but that's my answer. Yeah, I think the doomsday clock has started. I think it's ticking real fast.
Well, I guess, can any enterprise really go out of business if people give it money? And maybe not, but they will stop giving it money. I, like Gene, in the business world, when you've got lots and lots of little guys running all over, then you roll them up. You go to waste, become a waste management. When you buy all the local waste companies, you become a dry cleaner, where you buy all the dry cleaners and put them under your one name. We need to roll up our nonprofits. We need fewer, bigger, more powerful nonprofits.
I'm more of an optimist. I agree what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying about small nonprofits. I think another interesting point, which I won't go into because I know we're running out of time, is that, mergers and acquisitions, something that is celebrated in the for-profit sector, are seen as a failure in the nonprofit sector. And I'm all for more collaboration. That has been sort of the guiding force of my last year or so at Awakenings, finding ways to plug into resources that already exist. But I don't think, whether or not the amount of small nonprofits needs to change, I don't think the money is going to get sucked up by big business, because the money is only growing. And I do think there is a new generation of leaders, even younger than, us, that are going to rise to the surface and really change the way we think about philanthropy and the way we think about wealth redistribution and the way we think about social justice. And I have a lot of hope, as I was saying earlier, I have a lot of hope for them, and I think we're going to see some great things, and I can't wait for it.
Well, because I have a quick little speech to make at the end of our segment here, I'm going to ask everybody to just say one thing that they are inspired to say that's come out of our discussion.
Ernie's speech earlier really inspired me when you were talking about just the comparisons with the war history, and I was ready to go after that. I was like, let's go take on the world. And depending on if I have coffee or not, I'm also a pessimist. But what Laura just said, that really, the younger generation, and because I'll have the doom and gloom scenario, but some of the stories she's shared, at least about that question that your student asked, how sharp. I think we underestimate human potential, and I think that's where what I've learned today.
Big problems need big solutions.
I don't know. I'm inspired by all of you. I can't think of a single specific thing to say. This whole conversation has really warmed my heart, and I feel like talking about this with the three of you, and hopefully more people in the future, just makes me feel really, really certain that we're going to figure this out and we're going to make some real significant changes. So, Thank you.
All I want to say is I pray to whatever people pray to, that I'm around long enough to see change. That's all I want. I just want to touch on something really briefly. And again, it was inspired by reading Dan's book. The name of our podcast is Shame on You. Dan makes a point in here that it's kind of leftover puritanical thinking, which I am opposed to. It's leftover puritanical thinking to have this idea that people need to be shamed into supporting nonprofits, however they choose to do it, with their money, with their time, with their collaborations. I want to say right now, even though we all have fun with the name, and I had fun rapping about it in the theme song, we're not here throwing shame on individuals. We're not here saying, shame on you, this is a terrible problem, and why the hell aren't you doing something about it? The whole concept of shame on you just really comes from what's at the core of our mission, which is considering how much this happens, what is wrong with us as a culture that we are not addressing it differently. That's shame. It's more like global shame. I don't want anybody to think, I don't want anybody, any of you out there to think that we think less of you if you do, or, whatever we think of you as a human being has nothing to do with whether or not you support the podcast. We're not about throwing shame. I got it. We're not about throwing shame. We're about shining us light on things that we think are shameful. How's that?
That sounds great. I remember, if I may, I thought a lot about this when you told me the podcast name, and I remember talking to you about how I think donors should be celebrated. And I've done a lot of thinking about bringing people to our side, educating people who don't know anything about this, who don't have a personal experience with it or prefer not to think about it, how to bring them over to make them understand how prevalent this is and how much it needs to be stopped and how much we need their help. And I think of a person like that as a hero of our story. And Jean, I think you're a hero. Ernie, I think you're a hero. Derek, I think you're a hero. And I think it's really important what you said, to really celebrate these people that we want to bring over, because we're not trying to shame you.
No.
We need you desperately, and we would love for you to be the hero of our stories.
It was all, it was,
That's
listen,
great.
the title
That's
was...
a PSA, by the way.
Yeah,
That's great.
the title was an attention grabber. I didn't like it. Tom and Derek loved it. There, shame on them. They're the ones.
And I'm supposed to be the marketing guy.
They're the ones that talked me into it. But true. I remember those conversations. I had something really brilliant and insightful to say about that, and now I'm in the process of forgetting it. It was something that you just said. What'd you just say? You said
Celebrating.
celebrating donors, not shaming them. Oh, what the heck? I'll think of it and save it for the next podcast. And speaking of next podcasts, this is a theme we're going to be returning to. Maybe we're a little bit off mission here. Maybe we went a little bit global. We have guests lined up, officially, maybe not officially, but we've got guests lined up, and we're definitely going to be talking more mission related. But I love what happened here today. Exceeded my wildest expectations. I would like to bring more and more people from the for-profit sector, although, honey, I hope you're always available if I can't find them, or if Derek can't find them. But, this is something I think we are going to return to time and time again with different voices from the for-profit sector to just give us some insights on, why did this start and how do we make it different?
Thank you for having me. It's been my honor to be with you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Ernie, every time you guys talk, I learn something. My notes today are not from the book. It's just from things Laura and Ernie said. So I'll be sharing those with our online audience. Just so you know.
I'm feeling guilty. I took no notes. Thank you for joining us. Please consider supporting us through our website.
So, like Laura said, we need heroes. And if you want to become our hero, you could please go to patreon.com/Shame on You Podcast Social to become a subscriber. And we can check out Shame on You on all social media platforms. And our website is shameonyou podcast.social.